I get the icon in cornflower blue?
Welcome to episode 39 of Can I Get That Software in Blue? I'm your host, Chad Tyndall. Joining from the deserts of Phoenix with serious heat, the emperor of elastic with rhythm so deep, whether scaling search or dropping a beat, his wisdom's a vibe you'll want to keep. Steve Masak, everybody. Welcome to the show.
Every single time you make me laugh and smile.
That's what I'm trying. We're on episode 39. We're almost pretty close to episode 50. Like, are we going to do something special for episode 50? What can we do?
That's a good point, actually.
The live episode filmed from a hot air balloon? Are we finally going to...
Maybe not a hot air balloon, but maybe some hot air in Phoenix.
We always talk about getting on a hot air balloon. And
I think we should do it from a glider. Like,
it's in our logo.
We should do it in a glider. Oh, that's true. It is in our logo. We need an actual picture.
An actual picture, but an actual episode. I feel like we could be in the balloon recording with someone. We'll get someone for that.
You think they'd let me fly my drone around the balloon as it's going?
Why not?
That'd be kind of fun. We'd
Why
get
not?
Some epic shots that way.
That would be badass.
Yeah, that would be cool. Okay.
Or as the kids say, that would be bussin', dog.
Wait,
no cap.
Is that
no
so?
Cap.
Is that based? Would that be based?
I don't think that
kidding.
would be based, but it would be lit, yo. No cap.
Would it increase our Riz?
Oh yeah, definitely. Definitely. We'd be drippy in Riz. Okay.
Oh my god. I can't keep
I'm learning so much already. This is great.
All right. Well, let's bring our special guest in. From the Oxford halls to CTO calls, his spicy hot takes definitely enthralls. Alex Jukes, welcome to the show.
Thanks so much. Pleasure to be here.
All right. And you're joining us from London.
That's right. Yeah.
All right. Welcome.
Nice sunny day here. Very unusually. Yeah.
It's very sunny in New York City as well. I was just outside, but it's also like 20 degrees, so it's not at all warm.
That's the kind of thing with New York. Like London, it's gray and wet, but it kind of never gets that cold. And I was always surprised going to New York. It's like, I was talking to someone, they were there the other week, it's like minus, well, we talk about it in Celsius, right? So it's like, I'm thinking about like minus 10. So I'm like, you just never get that in London. You get wet, but you never get that cold.
And you're further north, I think, ironically.
Yeah,
so
we've got the Gulf Stream, unless climate change gets rid of that at some point. I hope it doesn't, because I don't want minus 10.
It would be really cold if the jet stream like went away or something.
I mean, can you imagine all the streets in London freezing, all those bikes? Man, that would be epic to watch.
All right. Well, we're going to get into your background and everything you're working on now, but I want to kind of start off with a bang, relatively speaking. We're going to do like crazy hard-hitting stuff here, but I want to give people a little red meat up front. So one of the reasons that I wanted to have you on is because you do these really spicy hot takes on LinkedIn, most of which I completely agree with, by the way. And
Thank you.
The things that I say as well, kind of privately, but ones that caught my attention was this post you made about why Salesforce must die. Mm-hmm. And I really happen to agree with this. Like I really couldn't agree more, actually. So I've used Salesforce at many of the last few jobs that I've had over the last 13 years, and it sucked every time. I mean, literally everybody hates it, right?
Yeah.
It's customized everywhere. It's expensive to implement. The data model is different in every company. Custom record definitions built out so that creating a report is like some bespoke task that only subject matter experts like well-versed in the magical incantations can accomplish. And because they spend so much on building it out, upper management makes middle management whip the lower level management to hammer on everybody to use it. And it's just like, oh, it's terrible. And I agree that their product is terrible. They should die.
Not to mention, Chad, the fact that every single time I go into a forecast call or anything at work, they use some other tool. It's like, what are we doing? Why do we have to buy all these add-on tools for Salesforce? It's supposed to be like this uber super powerful platform, and we end up having to add tools to make it simple.
Yeah. So I wonder how this company got so big with such a crappy product.
I think you kind of already hit the nail on the head. And it's funny because this hot take, it was one of those things where, look, I can go into some of my own like personal battles with Salesforce and just like how much it sucks, basically. But kind of that post emerged out of some more like first principle thinking almost that I've been doing recently, whereby, so one of my big things at the moment is talking about like, optionality in software, and the value of software is defined by its optionality. And that what is optionality in the context of software is basically how easy it is to change. So the easier software is to change, the more value you create. And in the case of, and so I can go into that in a bit more detail, but I've been thinking a lot about it, and particularly in the context of AI. And I think we're on the cusp of, lots more software being created. And it's going to really, I don't think redefine what it means to be a software engineer, but really kind of force us to grapple with what being a software engineer is really about and the value we really provide. And I think it's really tightly related to this idea of optionality. We create value by being able to change things, right?
And when you say change, are you talking about the user of Salesforce being able to customize everything in it, or as an engineer, how easy it is to change?
So this is exactly it. So I'm talking like in the abstract here. Generally, in terms of software, we as engineers, we want to make it easier to change. We write tests, we design it well. We want to make our lives easier, right? And the easier it is to change, the more valuable the software is. You could have two apps that are identical in every way, but one is worth 10 times more than the other. Why? Because you can change it and it's not painful. This one has no tests, it's spaghetti code. Only one person has the magic deployment incantation to be able to, it's a nightmare. So it's really hard to change. So even though they look identical, this one's worth way more because it's easy to change. Now, in the case of Salesforce, it's, as we've just discussed, it's really difficult to change. And so all the value is essentially being accrued by Salesforce by having its own internal, basically an entire industry just built around it. Like, it's so difficult to change that it's actually creating loads of value for Salesforce devs and for Salesforce itself, because it's not generic, it's not easy to change, and it basically means that the only people who can change it are Salesforce devs, and that creates an entire industry around it.
Are you saying that the Salesforce devs have made it hard to change so that job security for them?
I think it's more, I think because it's hard to change, you have to have Salesforce devs. And of course, and because you have Salesforce devs, they are not going to be incentivized to make it easier to change. They've trained on how to do it. They're going to do it the Salesforce way. And the default Salesforce way is to make it difficult to change. And so they're not going to invest loads of effort to make it easier to change, because essentially that is their job. If it was really easy to change and anyone could come in, why would anyone pay them to do it? And so it's that old quote of, the quote is something along the lines of, it's really difficult to convince someone of something when their salary depends on them not understanding it.
Yeah.
That old quote, right?
Yeah.
It's really difficult to get someone to understand something when their salary depends on them not understanding it.
Yeah.
Pretty sure that's the quote.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think you can't have a better example of that than sales. And it's a shame. I had some of the comments in that post from Salesforce devs, and a few of them obviously kind of criticizing it, but also a few saying, what if this was to happen, what does that mean for me? And for me, almost the sad thing is that, and the Salesforce devs I've worked with, they're not bad. They're usually good developers. Focus has been so narrow. They've used those skills in this very narrow, brittle, essentially ecosystem. And if that was to be disrupted, I don't doubt that they have the skills and the mindset to be able to work as more like generic developers or engineers in other companies. But it's going to be a rough adjustment, and it's going to take time for them to be able to get to the level that maybe they are within that very small ecosystem. Although it's a pretty large ecosystem. I think that's
a huge ecosystem. I don't understand why people use it. I understand why companies who adopted it 20 years ago are still using it, but new companies that are starting today are still choosing it. Yeah. Some are using HubSpot or something a little simpler, a little cheaper. Yeah. But even that's like getting out of control and expensive 100%. For small businesses.
100%. And I do think that's where AI, the AI thing is really gonna disrupt stuff. And I think that you're gonna see the rise of a lot more personalized, custom built, internally built tools that do a lot of the stuff. And I think the famous example of this at the moment is Klarna, here based largely in the UK. It's a pay
it's
now,
pay as you go. Yeah, it's a pay
exactly
buy
now, pay later lender. They've got into some controversy around this, and there's been some stuff in the press around it. But essentially, from my understanding, they're seeking to replace Salesforce internally by building their own internal AI tooling. And when you're talking about the level, especially for big companies, the level of licensing agreements they're paying towards Salesforce, the incentives to go, hey, if this was, I don't know, however many, a few £1,000 or tens of thousands of pounds, dedicating a team of engineers to try and replace it, it's not worth it, right? But if you're talking like 6-7 figure annual licensing fees, which is the case with some of these larger contracts, suddenly, suddenly investing in a team cut this out potentially completely. And not just that, but offer like a much better product. I think this is the fundamental thing with Salesforce is, I don't know. I don't think I'd have an issue with it. If it wasn't a really poor product. It's not necessarily about the cost. It's just that it's this, no one enjoys using it. As you've already said, Chad, it sucks. I need to think of a more articulate way, especially as a British guy, of saying this, but it's really unpleasant to deal with. The UI is terrible. It's not a good product. And so...
It's bollocks? Is that how it is?
It's a load of bollocks, definitely. And so, the incentive, if it was just cost, but it was a decent product, okay. If it was a crappy product, but it wasn't so expensive, okay. And if there wasn't this potential radically new technology which you want to invest in R&D and upskilling on anyway, just like regardless. But then also you have this potentially like low hanging fruit of a significant cost you could save, and you're a certain scale investing in it becomes to me a no-brainer, right? And a lot of people were saying in the comments, this could apply to kind of any, system of record or like large scale cloud provider. And I'm sure that to some extent that's true. At the same time, I do think the level of disruption we're going to see over the next few years is going to be massive. And I do think the difference between it is the innovator's dilemma, right? Being able to think and build stuff with an AI first mindset when you're, as I said, this entire company, which is incentivized. I mean, it's fascinating. The news that came out a few weeks ago where I think they're either cut it, they're not hiring any more engineers. They may even be, but they're significantly ramping up sales. And to me, it's a very clear example of this quarter, next quarter thinking, and this kind of applies to the industry as a whole at the moment when it comes to AI, with just like really myopic, really short-sighted in terms of how does this play out over the next few years? Sure, you might be getting a productivity boost from your senior engineers right now, but are you really doing the hard work I think this is the best metaphor I've come across, for the AI stuff. It's like electricity, right? It's like a new form of electricity. And I got this from Jeff Bezos, it's obviously not original, but he talked about, when electricity was first installed into houses, there's no plug sockets, there's nothing like that. There was just a place where a light bulb was fitted, right? That was it. Like you didn't buy electricity, you bought a light bulb. People didn't know what electricity was. They just wanted a light bulb.
What other work it could do, yeah.
And then the first electronic appliances where you were plugging stuff into the light bulb socket, right? Like that was how you would power. There was no off switch, there was no switches at the walls. It was always on and you would plug stuff into it. And all this, what we now, the electrical infrastructure came a lot later. And so I think we're in a similar place with AI. And so I think kind of Salesforce is in the zone of going, look at, we're really selling our Salesforce light bulb with that and completely missing, what electricity is basically.
Well, and Alex, the thing I was going to say is I heard Benioff mention that they aren't hiring any more engineers or developers. And then I watched a YouTube video of some guy saying that's total BS. He did a search on their career page and found over 200 open positions. I just did it and there's 400 open positions for development. So it's I think there's a disconnect between leadership and the rest of the company, right? And so when he goes out and says things like that, it just shows you that it's the hype bubble feeding the hype bubble a little bit. And then I think that combined with all these AI scores for LLMs on these developer tests that show how good of code it can write is completely separated from the real world, because you see comments like one of the comments on one of your posts about the junior developers that we'll get to next is it can't even write a simple CLI tool yet. It scores the best on the developer benchmark for LLMs. And it's kind of becoming a meaningless test.
Well, it's always, things are always going to be taught to the test to some extent. But, to your point, that companies are definitely, if he's only hiring 200 to 400 right now, that's a lot less than would have been expected. And so they're making exceptions for specific things that are maybe AI related. And they're going to hire some AI related people, but not many of the other jobs, and see how they can do. I totally believe that there's less hiring going on, certainly in the junior ranks. And yeah, Alex, you had another post about that. So this is a good way to dovetail into that. So you had a post of talking about the fact that nobody's hiring junior engineers, and AI tools people are trying to make AI replace that. And I totally see that, because I've been using this tool for the last 2 months called Devon.ai. Yeah. And it's like magic. It is about a junior engineer level quality of what it can do. So it still needs a lot of oversight, and sometimes it'll get off in the weeds and you got to bring it back in. But the fact is, it's amazing. It writes amazing code. It doesn't ever stop. It has its own environment for running tests. It can do browser-based tests. It can do CLI-based tests, everything fully automated. And just yesterday, I had multiple of them going on completely different applications I was building, different tasks, and I could just watch them go and kind of correct them if one of them got off the way. But it's a little bit like overseeing, 5 other people and just correcting them when they, get off in the wrong direction. But it's way more productive than me trying to write all this by myself. And this is the early days.
100%. And I think that I guess where it comes, for me, that post, that one kind of blew up even more than the Salesforce one, right? And I think it definitely resonate with a lot of people. I think if I am a publicly traded company, I'm a Meta or Salesforce or one of these companies, it makes complete economic sense, exactly with the reality that you've described. We've got a bunch of senior engineers. we're going to have these AI tools that they're already, pretty good and are only going to get better. And basically we're just going to like pull up the ladder, like get rid of the managers, don't hire any juniors. We don't need to like grow any more people anymore or help them develop. We're just going to kind of focus on our existing senior engineers. They're going to be whatever, 5x, 10x, whatever. I think the idea of AI as an amplifier is a really useful way of thinking about it, in that it amplifies your strengths and your weaknesses as well. And so it makes a lot of sense, right? You're going to cut costs. You're going to have at least the same productivity, if not more, and shareholders are happy. It makes a lot of sense. The challenge I see with this is very short term, basically, because even if you take the assumption that these tools are going to get better and our senior devs can just do more and more and more, at some point those senior devs are either going to basically they're going to start realizing how much value they're creating independently. They're going to start asking for some pretty, if they're smart, which most of them will be asking for some pretty hefty pay rises. If they're not getting them, they're going, why am I building all this value for you? I can go off and start doing my own thing, right? And I think that, of course, there's still a leap into that entrepreneurial or consultant mindset that not everyone's going to take. But I still think you're going to see, or they're just going to, at some point, like retire or, want more like a different work-life balance, whatever it is. And then where is the next generation coming from? And there is an argument to say, well, there isn't going to be a next generation, right? Everything's going to be AI all the way down. And, that's kind of the end of it. Like, this is the last hurrah of any sort of software development. And I think going back to what you were saying though, Chad, is this misconception, software engineering, software development is about writing code. And it's never really been about writing code. Up until now, writing code has been a part of the job because that is what you've needed to do to, have that business impact. But it goes back to what I was saying before about optionality. My kind of current working definition of a software engineer, a software developer, potentially we're going to need new terms to start thinking about some of this stuff, is someone who cultivates optionality. Software is going to be pretty much every company is going to be software enabled in some shape or form. You might not be a tech first company like building cutting edge LLMs, but even if you're a kind of local mom and pop shop, you probably have a website. You have, every company to different levels will be tech enabled. And so some value of your company is going to be directly tied to your software. The value of your software is defined by optionality. And so, and when we talk about optionality, there's always these two pressures. So you have the more optionality, the more you increase the optionality of software, you're basically creating $10 tomorrow, right? And the trade-off to that, but it's not always a trade-off space. So this is our natural instinct, I believe, as engineers, is like, we want to increase our optionality. We want to optimize for those $10 tomorrow. So one of my favorite kind of ways of like, do you have an engineering mindset? Are you an engineer? Is if you've got a spreadsheet with, you've got to do this thing for 100 entries, the non-engineer will go and manually do those 100 things. The engineer will find some way of writing a formula or doing something so that they do it once and then it's just done for all 100. Now, often that second option takes longer than it would have taken, right, to just do the manual end. But once you've done it, you can do it for 100, you can do it for 1,000, you can do it for essentially any arbitrary number. And so sometimes though, you need to have that spreadsheet done in an hour, right? And so you might go, you know what? I've tried to do a quick formula. This isn't working. I'm just going to do it manually. So there's always this
quick and dirty has a place. Yeah,
absolutely. And so
that's
this
why
is
we
the
have
key
millions
thing.
of spreadsheets in the world. Over time.
Exactly. I mean, one of my favorite, I think there's a company called Levels FYI, which does salary bands. And I think I don't know if it's still the case, but I know they scaled pretty significantly using Google Sheets as their back end. They had to do a hell of a lot of caching and all this sort of stuff. But for like years, they use Google Sheets as their back end.
Definitely startups. I mean, time to market is more important than creating the least brittle software. It's like just spaghetti code it, put it up, see if users use it. If not, move on to the next thing. If they do, okay, then you can rewrite it later.
Exactly. So this is always the trade-off space we're operating in, right? There's $10 tomorrow, do it all the right way, best practice. But sometimes it's like, we need $1 today. Like if I have the choice of the two apps, one's worth 10 times more and this one's worth 10 times less. But this one I get like tomorrow and we've got a demo tomorrow. And if we don't do this demo, then we don't get funding and we're dead. I'm taking that one, right? Because it's the point of me having $10 tomorrow if we're dead tomorrow. I'm working in the startup
you don't have to pay technical
space.
debt off if your company's no longer around.
That's right.
Exactly. So this is why I actually I've got an article being published this week where I thought it's like time to retire. I believe it's time to retire technical debt. Essentially, when we talk about technical debt, lots of people mean lots of different things. I mean, I've been guilty of it myself. I can use it to kind of talk about like things that just annoy me. Like, I don't like this coding style. This is tech debt, right? I want to, I want to tidy it up. I think the reason I talk a lot about optionality now is because we're talking about the same thing, which is we can do it like we can incur tech debt. We can do it a bad way. We can reduce. We're focusing more on $1 today than $10 tomorrow. But like we need to do that in order, like so that we can survive. Yeah. And then potentially we can optimize making $10 tomorrow when we know that we have many tomorrows to come and we're really focusing on a bigger pie in the future. And
but you talk about not pulling the ladder up on junior engineers. But if a startup can succeed with one senior engineer and a bunch of AI tools, how can they literally can't justify hiring a bunch of junior engineers, because if they did, then someone else would outcompete them, building the same thing for less money. So I'm having trouble like pulling your two ideas together here.
Absolutely. I think it's a really good point. And so this comes back to, and I realize I've kind of gone on a long-winded thing, but this comes back to like, I think the definition of an engineer is about cultivating optionality, increasing the value of the future value of software. And this has to be balanced against delivering value today. Now, I think with AI tools, you're going to see a huge increase in the amount of software being created, in particular by like non-technical people. Now, if you're a product manager, if you're just one of those people, and I know many of them who are like, hey, I've got this great idea for an app. Like now they can build it. They'll read the mom test, they can build it, they can ship it. And some, like most of them, let's be honest, will be junk and not go anywhere, right? But there'll be so many once people begin to realize, hey, I always had this idea for an app, and maybe it's like hyper local or hyper niche, or maybe it's like just for them. It's like that will be fine. Like the costs are now going to be so low to get that essentially MVP out that they're going to be able to do that. Now, once you start doing that, I think you're going to see more software being created, more software that starts actually making money. You'll have people who will build that prototype using Replit or using one of these, kind of no code AI one-shot solutions. And, they'll spin up a landing page and they'll get signups and people start putting their Stripe, start paying on Stripe, and they might start getting money and they start. But this comes down to AI is going to be really good at creating dollar today software, right? It's going to be really good at generating software that gives us $1 today. It's going to suck at generating $10 tomorrow software for a whole variety of reasons. For one thing, there's an argument that says it could be good at it, but you have to know how to ask it to do that. And again, most non-engineers will not even think about it. They won't understand what the value of decoupling, of, having highly modularized components, of all these, concepts will be alien to them.
Number one, you're right. Like business folks that don't understand how to build software, they don't think about things like HADR, backups, replication, single point of failure. And I think that this wave is coming. There's no way to stop it. And we may finally be at the place where like low code, no code solutions start taking off. My challenge with that is that we haven't gone and automated the rest of the software pipeline. So like the build systems that we use, how are those going to change if a low code, no code person is in there? How do we debug if my data is not AI enabled, right? Like how's a business person going to debug a problem where they get like a 404 or 500 error or worse, data starts getting corrupted? What are they going to do? And if you don't have AI tools on the back end managing all that infrastructure and looking for bugs, looking for errors, and being able to like automatically detect, diagnose, and remediate, then you're still going to need someone to do debugging. And I think that goes back to the junior developer thing too, is like a big part of teaching developers is not just teaching them how to code, is teaching them how to debug. The best developers are the best debuggers because they 100%. Understand how things go through the system, right? And I do wonder about that too. Like we're losing skills. Like we were talking about earlier with typing. My daughter's never typed on a typewriter as far as I know. And I'm losing my ability to write, which is why I just bought a notebook. But then I'm like, I never pick it up. I don't actually use the pen. So maybe I won't know how to write in a few years.
I think you're right that the AI tools today don't understand modern deployment architectures and how to do HADR, serverless, all this other stuff. I think that's just a matter of time because this is the same complaint. People used to make this complaint before, like developers don't know how to do assembly programming anymore. And you used to needed to know how to do that. And for a long time, that was probably, and over time and over decades, like that just doesn't matter anymore. Nobody needs to know how to do assembly unless you're building chips or writing operating systems or something at the very lowest level.
Well, Chad, that's true, but they still need to know how to debug. Like that has not gone away in my entire career as a software developer. Like no matter what happens as far as the more innovative we get on building it and the new frameworks that come out, like the debugging it's still
But
a thing.
what makes you think AIs won't be able to debug?
Because they're trained on humans and humans create bugs. That's my thinking at the highest level.
I mean, personally, I think there is definitely a world in which people already just like chuck error messages into the LLM they're using and just say like, how do I fix this, and copy paste the code. And I think like with more agentic stuff that's coming, it's going to run it, it gets the error, it notices the error, it picks the error up, it goes, how do I solve this? It solves it.
Yeah, Devin does that now. I had an error and it just went on Google. It did its own Google search. It found the Microsoft tech note for how to solve it, and then it implemented the solution. I was like, that's amazing.
Yeah.
So my experience using like VS Code and Python by just not coding, just saying, build this piece of code, copy, paste, run. Here's the error, copy, paste, fix, copy, paste the solution. I haven't gotten very far doing that. And I've tried it on like ChatGPT and Gemini and a few others. So I do agree that it's going to get there eventually. I got to believe that it will. But
I'd agree with that. And so then the question comes back to, well, then, yeah, where does this leave like junior engineers? And I think there's two parts to this. The one hand is, I do think whatever engineers look like in the future, it's going to require a different set of skills and tools than what we have today. For the mass developer, I think like, as you were saying, the assembly example is super interesting. Like, do I think there will still be scope or room for, like a React devs? Like, yes, in the sense that now most React apps in the world, I'm sure in the next few years will all be written by AI. But there'll be cases where like we have, you'll need specialists who in certain cases, for whatever reason, the LLMs just cannot get in there, or people using the LLMs don't understand enough to even know what to ask them. That you'll then, if someone has that React experience and is AI savvy, and AI is a skill, right? And so they know how to go into that code base, they understand enough React to actually be able to read it and go, wow, what a mess. I think one of the things that's going to be interesting, I suspect you'll essentially have like almost like a bit like you have with legacy code now, but this new legacy code is going to be is currently be created now. You're going to be people going in there, trying to identify what LLM model wrote the code. And like maybe there'll be certain tells that be able to say, this was a 3.5 job, or this was a Devin. And then maybe that kind of agent has particular patterns it uses or particular problems it runs into. And they're going to be going in and, basically trying to like debug it. Like, as most developers don't need to know anything about assembly, but there are still people who make a living and probably make in some cases a good living off knowing how to debug assembly stuff and go in there. So I think what we're seeing is the pie is going to expand, basically. The pie is going to expand. And for a lot of developers, if you're earning six figure, your really successful career being like just a React dev, and that's all, and you're kind of like, I have headphones on, give me the ticket, I write the code and it's done. Like, this isn't going to be a new world for you. Like, as in, you're going to have to change, because now, for a lot of stuff, it's just like, we don't need, and especially if you're not really leveraging AI and doing a lot more for a lot less, you're simply not going to be part of the wave, basically. And so going back to the junior engineers, do I think that companies, and I work with startups, right? So I'm working in London with a lot of kind of London startups of different sizes, usually quite early on. And is there appetite? So for them, they're less interested in, hardcore technical skills, right? But are they interested in AI native engineers who have a growth mindset, who are ready, who basically like, this is a new world, right? So there is what engineering looks like, what the state of the industry looks like in 5 years. Who knows? Like I really don't. It's let alone what next year is. I mean, I think about some of the stuff that happened in the last month when it comes to AI news, and it's like the pace is crazy, right? So they want people. It comes back. So my line on AI has always been, AI is going to force us to do the things that we can only do as humans, right? So is writing code an integral aspect of what it means to be a human being on this planet? No. Like, I enjoy writing code. It's fun. It has a bit, it's, I've written enough boilerplate to know that it's not always fun. And it's always to serve a purpose. I write code because I like to help people. I like to build stuff that makes my life easier, makes other people's lives easier, whatever it is. I like, and I enjoy the challenge of it. I like solving problems. And I don't think that, and it's it's something creative, right? And I think that this is one of the core differentiators between humans and AI is AI isn't creative. It is always a rehash, and it can give a really good semblance of creativity. It can take different ideas and combine them together and kind of, but it's not truly creative. It's like, essentially there's this idea of bubble history, right? Which is, there's all these different views of history.
I thought you were going to give us the history of bubbles. I was getting excited.
That would be now I can ask AI to go and research that. Let me do a deep research while I say. There's this idea, there's the kind of progressivist idea of history. Things are getting better, always an ever brighter future, right? There's things are getting worse. This was like the Greeks, right? They were like, we used to, it was all gods and amazing, and now it's all crap, right?
Well, Alex, I want to challenge you on the creative aspect,
okay, please,
because part of me thinks, just based on my experience, that creativity comes from combining ideas from disparate places, right? Like you bring in something that you learn in biology and you apply that same principle that you now understand into a technology, and you come out with something new. And if AI has all the world's data, all the world's domains, and all this research, like it can find potentially new things. And is that by nature of the word creative, or the definition, is that creativity?
It's a deep question, right? It's a very deep question. And I guess
if it discovers, what about if it discovers a novel mathematical proof that nobody else ever thought of before?
Or a new medicine.
Isn't that being creative?
Yeah.
So there's always, I think there's this, and mathematics is a great example, right? Are we discovering mathematics or creating it?
No, we're discovering it because it's there before we knew it, right?
Exactly. So there's kind of using it to uncover deeper levels of reality.
But working on proofs is inherently creative, I feel like, because you're trying to, anytime I took formal mathematics and I had to prove things, it took me hours to work on one problem. I really had to think about it. I was pulling in other ideas from different branches of math to try to solve this problem. Yep. And it was inherently creative. But if a computer could do that, then I guess I would have to admit that it was being creative in that moment.
So, Chad, you're talking about something more advanced than just multiplication? That's about as advanced as I get on that.
Yeah, something more advanced than multiplication. Yeah, let's start with that. Well, actually, so this is a good pivot since you were talking about history. So you studied history at Oxford. And
Correct.
First of all, I literally don't know anyone who went to Oxford. So I'm just curious, how do you get into Oxford, and why did you pick history?
Good question. So why did I pick Oxford? Both my parents actually went to Cambridge. So it's kind of like the lamest form of teenage rebellion I could muster. To be honest,
so you come from an academic household.
So both my parents are journalists, and that was the thing. So I actually said this to a teacher of mine who was kind of helping me do my application and stuff. I said, both my parents went to Cambridge. He said, you're going to get in there. Okay. And this like really threw me, right? I was like, what, do they have like some secret ledger somewhere? Are they like taking my bloodline? And, how it's actually much more kind of banal and maybe slightly more depressing. I don't know how, unless if you really like secret societies and stuff, but it's more that I had two obviously well-educated parents. They prioritized academic focus and debates around the dinner table and all these, a lot of this is cultural, right? So a lot of that kind of Oxbridge, Oxford, Cambridge, a lot of it is cultural. And so I didn't realize this, but I'd been, both my parents went there, they were kind of inculcating me to an extent with some of that. I'm not sure how consciously they were doing it, but they went there, they had these values, they had this experience, and they kind of, whether consciously or unconsciously, passed that on to me. And so, one of the key things with Oxford is you have, they're called tutorial sessions. Unlike a lot of colleges, you and maybe one or two other people in the room with the professor, like who's some leading expert in whatever niche of history, in my case, you're doing. And he's read your essay that you wrote maybe, at 2 a.m. the night before. And he or she is just, he's reading going, what the hell, and having a debate and going through it with you, usually in painful detail in that, and having a debate about it in that session. So a lot of it's like about debating, at least in the case of history. A lot of it's about discussion. And so, yeah, that's kind of what makes it quite unique. And so that's how I guess I applied. I was like, I'm going to give it a shot. I didn't really have that much confidence. I got in and then I was like, well, I guess I'm going to go. Like, you can't really turn it down. And then, yeah, history, a student who was there, I think basically summed it up really well, which is it's about teaching you how to read. It's about teaching how to, because we would have 2 essays every week and, an entire, maybe 10, 15 reading, a list of 10 or 15 books for each of those essays. And so you just had to get really good at synthesizing information.
You had to read 10 to 15 books a week?
I mean, you didn't, right? So one of the key things is like,
Reference
what
them,
can
yeah.
I not read? What can I just read the introduction of? What can I like understand what that book says without having to read it? So it was a real case of, it was like a forcing function, right? Like you had to get how, what, maybe I'm even constructing the argument to answer this question before I even start reading the book. So I can pick the ones that, either will inform it or maybe counter it or whatever it is. It was the way I describe Oxford is, so I teach Tai Chi, and my Tai Chi teacher would say, the one who I learned from in kind of the school, traditionally in some schools in China, what they would do is at kind of martial arts academies, they would just have a big stick and just swing it as hard as they could at like hip height, right? So really big, and everyone would have to jump over it. And those that didn't, just like broken leg, they're in a car going back home. They, that's it. It's brutal, right? But those jump, like they learn to jump really well, really quickly, right? And that's kind of on like an intellectual level what Oxford was like. It was pretty brutal. Like it was, as I said, those tutors wouldn't hold back. They would tear your essay apart. But guess what? You got really good at being able to argue your case. You got really good at figuring out, how am I going to make an argument here? How am I going to, be able to defend myself intellectually? And so it's a hard environment, but I definitely got a lot out.
Does Oxford mainly have majors that are English, that type of stuff? Or do they also have computer science and engineering majors?
Yeah, they have computer science and engineering majors. So in the UK, we don't have like major minor system. Like you just have one topic. You have one subject. So you can't vary, which is, I definitely think like a weakness of our system and something I've always admired about the US system. The good thing about history is, again, one of the reasons I chose it is it's kind of a bit of a cheat because guess what? Anything you can think of, there's a history of, right? Like history of computer science, history of sports. So, and for me, I was always very interested in like philosophy. And so I did like kind of focused on like intellectual history of philosophy, history of political theory. So it was kind of like I could study the other stuff I wanted to study through history, which was kind of a nice way. Because I always liked variety. I liked, in the UK, we niche really quick, really early, especially if you're going down a STEM route. At the age of 16, you're picking topics, and then in fact, even before that, you're picking topics at 14 that, if you go down the science route, if you don't go down the science route at that point, like you can't do it later. It's like you close off that path potentially as early as 14. So and I think in this modern world that we're going into, which is going to be a lot more about bringing lots of different ideas together, going back to that creativity stuff, it's a disadvantage.
Do you have any funny stories from your time at Oxford? I mean, do British kids do pranks and stuff like the MIT kids do?
So probably the funniest story I can think of. So I was probably the best thing about Oxford is in most universities in the UK, I play football or soccer, as you would call it in the US, but really bad. So in most universities in the UK, I wouldn't get anywhere near the team, right? Not even like the second team, like nowhere near. Now, the good thing about Oxford is it's not a single university. It's actually a collection of colleges. So there is no Oxford University. I went to one called St. Hugh's, and it's actually a collection of different, like almost like federated colleges. And so the good thing about that is you then have these essentially like much smaller universities, smaller schools, and each of them have their own football teams. And basically I was captain of the thirds team. So like I sucked, right? But I was able to get onto a team because I went to Oxford. Anyway, long story short, this season that we played, we won the league. The seconds team won the league. I think the first team had a good cup run. So we were all feeling very good about ourselves. And so if you ever come to the UK, I know Steve, you said you're in the UK recently. Yep. You'll see in like major cities like Oxford and London, kind of open top buses that will go around doing sightseeing. And so you also have a tradition in the UK, if a football team wins, that they'll go on an open top bus tour around like their city. So if Liverpool win, they'll go around, parading the trophy. So we didn't get any trophies, but we bought our own trophies. We won the league. We dressed up in our full suit and we got on the tour of Oxford bus, celebrating, letting off our champagne, showing off our trophies as this, bus driver is trying to, give a tour to all the tourists, trying to explain about the historical, interests of Oxford while we're kind of celebrating wildly. And we got quite a few photos of ourselves taken, people going, wow, what's this football team? Like, can we get your autograph? Like, what's going on? So we had a really good time.
Steve, I know what we're going to do. Celebrate our 50th episode now.
We got to buy a trophy for
We're
ourselves.
going to buy a trophy.
100%.
We're going to get on a bus.
No, dude, we'll get it on the hot air balloon. We'll fill it with champagne.
Yes.
Oh, we'll drink it. Drink the champagne from the trophy.
Totally.
Like a cup.
So, Alex, I'm curious. Like, I've seen a bunch of videos on YouTube where they have the debates. They're filming the debates, in Oxford, and it doesn't seem like everybody agrees with what the students are learning and the arguments that they're bringing forward. Like, you recognize Oxford being out of there for a while now, and like how it's changed or changing?
So I think, this kind of debate around free speech is kind of at the core of a lot of this stuff. And it's really interesting to kind of compare, especially at the moment, like the kind of UK and the US, and kind of the UK and also maybe the EU as well, right? As kind of very different approaches to this. And I saw a really helpful post the other day, I think it was on Substack, which kind of elucidated something that made a lot of sense to me, which is it kind of put it on a spectrum, right? So on the one hand, you've got kind of disdain and dislike of kind of bureaucracy, of censorship, anything that could be seen to kind of curtail individual liberties, right? And I think we definitely are more on that side in the UK than the US, and even more so we say, in Europe as well. So I'd say on average they are. And then, but the other side of this binary, so like that all kind of maybe sounds, well, yeah, that stuff all sucks. But part of the reason, or the other side of the spectrum, is like fear of the charismatic individual who can capture sort of, the organs of power, basically, right? And obviously in Europe and in places like Germany in particular, there's a very good reason why they're very distrustful and have very recent experience of a situation like that. And so why they're more on that side of the spectrum. And I guess all this to say that I don't believe there's like a right or wrong. There are definitely, I think there's always pros and cons to both of these things, and there's kind of extremes. I'm kind of politically, if you want to say that, like pretty much a centrist, or like maybe not a centrist, and I don't subscribe exclusively to either side. I'll try and choose the right things at the right time, because I don't think if you kind of are locked into one thing, then you're kind of limiting your thinking. So I guess all that to say, look, there are, I think the criticisms of this kind of free speech and or just having anyone come in, it comes from this place of fear of, well, actually, sometimes you can let people come in and they can, capture people's imaginations, and do really dangerous stuff with that. And so there is a fear of doing that. Now, on the other side, I also completely, that if you don't have these open debates, if you don't expose this stuff to sunlight, then it actually, as we've seen a lot of this in Europe, is like it kind of grows and festers, right?
Yeah.
And so I guess all that it's a very long way of saying, I don't know.
Yeah, that's fair.
I mean, the answer. But,
I love the debates because I learn both sides and like how they think and how they can put forward their argument.
Yes.
And I'm always curious about these things because I didn't go to university, so I never got to do that stuff. But I feel like now I can kind of get a free education with everything online. But it's been fascinating watching how these younger folks think versus the Gen X, I would say, is, I'm still part of Gen X. So, but I do agree with you. Like, you got to bring the ideas forward. Light usually does cleanse things. So
you were the CTO at Intropic in 2023 and 2024. It's a Series A company. It raised a total of $25 million by Ace Cap. You weren't the founding CTO, right?
No.
So how did you get from history major at Oxford to CTO at a financial services company? And also, and maybe you could tell us what Intropic does, because I was looking at their website, which I'm going to just pull up here really quick. And I'm looking at their website. It's a very fancy looking website. First of all, I love this like 80s branding. It reminds me of that like 80s. Remember like the cups that had like the blue and the purple like swirls on them and everything?
Dance clubs.
Kind of Tron-y.
Like. Yeah.
Got this cool animation as you scroll down, which I haven't seen a website do that before. Unlocking the power of information. That sounds good. Yeah, Cosmos is collapsing into disorder. Yeah, it's all this stuff. But I can't actually tell what this company does and what their product builds. So maybe tell us that. But how did you get there?
Sure. So I think probably it starts about 10 years ago. I'll do the short version, as short as I can make it. So 10 years ago, I joined like my first startup. It was called Byline Media, and it still actually is going today, sort of like different owners, etc. But it's still kind of going quite strong here in the UK. And the key idea with Byline when I joined it was crowdfunded journalism. So Kickstarter for journalism basically was the pitch. So this is where are we now? So this is 2014. It
was supposed to be like a Substack, like.
So now we've got stuff like Substack, and we've got examples of like how this could have worked. Needless to say, in 2014, it did not work. People have never really paid for journalism. Essentially, when you buy a newspaper or magazine, you're just buying adverts with some other content in between, right? The advertising is what paid for all of the kind of those traditional news things. So actually when it faced with the actual cost of what it costs to like pay journalists to do work, a lot of people were like, wow, no. Substack is its own case, and it'll be interesting to see how that scales. But certainly at the time...
Yeah, micropayments never took off either.
So the company then pivoted pretty hard, pretty quickly into like online fiction. It became a company called Radish, which again is still going well, and it ended up exiting for, I think, like 650 million, was sold to a Korean company. So it went on to do do very well. I joined on the content side. So I was like dealing with like getting writers on board, first journalists, kind of the fiction writers, writing lots of, newsletters, content stuff, all that sort of thing. So that was, but what I realized is like, man, startups are a lot of fun. They're like crazy, but they're a lot of fun. And also I love the product and tech world. Like, this is awesome. I want to do that basically. And so my original thought was I'll be a product manager, but I was like, but I kind of want to learn to code. So maybe I'll learn to code a bit. And so I actually, I did a boot camp, and basically they were like, we've had a few people come in here saying that you want to do this to become product managers. They all just become devs because it's a lot more fun. And that's exactly what happened to me. So I joined and then became a developer. And I'd say then for the next, like, whatever that is. So that was about 8 years. The next kind of like 6-7 years was kind of working like big, like, so the first company I worked for properly was called Times Educational Supplement, or TES. And that, like, the company itself is like 100 years old. It's part of the Times newspaper, right? So, I went from like pretty established, but still quite forward-looking. Actually, it was like a very forward-looking CTO and doing quite innovative tech stuff at the time. But I kind of like worked my way almost like one more earlier in the life stage of the company. And so by the time I got to Intropic, I actually joined as like an engineering manager. And this is actually kind of a common pattern I see at kind of startups, where they'll hire of their first like head of engineering or VP of engineering or something like that. And then about 6 months later, they're fired because basically they come in, they go, well, I'm the head of engineering now. This is how we do it. And the founders go, actually, this is how we do it. And then fight. And then the founders win, right, eventually, unless the VP can adapt. So that's what happened. He was fired. And basically after a while, I was like, look, you need someone in this spot, right? You need someone leading the tech side, working directly with you as founders. Like, I haven't done this before, but only guarantee I can give you is that I will do it your way. I have no other way to do it apart from your way. And I think that got me the gig. And so I stepped into that role. And in terms of what Intropic does, you're right to point out that it's quite deliberately sort of secretive. I have to think about sort of how much I can share, but basically its clientele is hedge funds, and they sell financial forecasting data amongst other stuff to hedge funds. So it's a pretty niche market at the moment, and essentially they don't need to publicize what they do, because if you're in that world, if you are like a quant trader in this hedge fund space and this particular strategy within the hedge fund space, you'll know almost by word of mouth. Or it's like, apparently like the early sales demos were like, so the only challenge was to get in front of these people. As soon as they got in front of them, they just showed it, and it was like, and it was almost like, we've got to get it, because whether or not
everyone else is going to get it.
Exactly. It's like, it just becomes almost like it's like, we've got to get it, because if we don't have it, everyone else is going to have that information. We lose the edge. So even if we're not getting an edge from it, we also just can't afford not to have it. It's going on to do lots of really interesting stuff. And I think in the future, the plan is to kind of go much more horizontal. And then maybe it will become something that people outside of that very small bubble know about. It's essentially kind of financial forecasting data. But it is a really interesting company, and they're doing some really innovative stuff, not just on the tech side. I think one of the most interesting projects they put into place, and this ties in some of the optionality stuff I was talking about, is so they moved to essentially like having business units. So one of the big challenges the founders faced, and I think this is true in a lot of engineering departments, is everyone was going, we want more autonomy. We want to be able to make decisions ourselves. We want to like work as these like small, product or value stream teams. And the founders were kind of like, we're kind of up for that. Obviously, founders tend to be like pretty resistant to give up control of stuff. But what they found is when they tried it in the past, like subcultures and cliques formed, and it caused more problems than it was worth, right? So it kind of reverted back the other way, and it was like, no, essentially like, we're going to tell you what to do, you build it, like, etc. Right? And so how do you square this circle, allowing people to kind of innovate and come up with their own stuff, but also keep them mission focused and essentially focused on like delivering value to the company, making money? And this isn't a common idea. This is a common idea in other industries, but I'd never heard of this before in the tech context, which is having business units. So essentially each of those teams had that access to their own P&L, their own profit and loss. And if their product that they were working on did well, like, they would get a cut of that P&L, right? So suddenly it's like, hey, it's up to you now. Like, you can run this how you want. But, we know you're going to be incentivized to run it.
So the engineers had profit sharing for their own product.
Essentially, exactly. The engineers, cross-functional team, engineers, designers, product managers-ish. There was no real explicit product managers, but some people were more in that role than others. Yeah.
Steve, I actually suggested this idea when we talked with Tanya, right? I actually was like, why don't we compensate people like this at the engineering level? And
100%.
this makes total sense to me. I don't know why
I know.
this isn't more common. It feels so obvious.
It's an
Feels really
instant
obvious.
prioritizer.
Well, I said it in the context of commissions, but I was like, maybe engineers should get commissions the way a sales rep, different percentage rates and everything. But, same idea, profit sharing, same idea.
Yeah, Chad, then every app would have ads. Oh, you want to look at your bank statement? Here's this ad.
But then people wouldn't use the product.
Exactly.
So that's a delicate balance.
But this is exactly this. You've highlighted it beautifully, and I think it comes back. This is what really triggered a lot of my thinking around the optionality stuff. Because for the first time, the story I tell around this is I had an engineer who I was like managing, right, and he was always like, "So when are we hiring?" So just to give a bit of flavor, kind of profile in terms of engineers, all very young folks at Intropic, hired directly out of uni. Like they're just trying to get them basically like really bright and young and just like let them develop there, right? And so I was at the ripe old age of whatever, like 34, like the oldest engineer there. And so suddenly, and so they were going, when are we hiring the seniors, right? When are we hiring the senior engineers to come in and, and teach us and tell us how to do it properly and stuff like that. And now one part of this is the founders didn't necessarily want to do that because they'd had experience of bringing seniors in. And as I said, there's this kind of, this is the way to do it. No, it isn't. Fight. But there was also an element I was saying is like, look, you're doing it, building this stuff, right? Sometimes it's janky. Sometimes you're making stupid errors, whatever. But for me, like the definition of what, a senior versus a junior is how many times have you failed? Like that's how many, if you're playing in a sandbox and everyone's kind of, your growth may be kind of safe, but it's much narrower. So like you're doing it and you're growing way quicker than you would if you actually had a senior here. And so all this to say, this was a back and forth. When are we going to hire them? When are we going to hire them? And then he got put in charge of one of these business units, right? So suddenly he's going to have a share of that P&L. And I had a conversation with him shortly after. I said, so now that this is going to essentially come out of your pocketbook, are you going to be hiring those senior engineers to come in and teach you? Or do you back yourself to do it? And he was like, I finally get what you were saying, right? Like, of course he backed himself. He's like, sure, it's not perfect, but I'd rather essentially do it myself, figure it out, and reap more of the rewards and bring someone in who's to like teach me when actually I'm kind of already doing it. And so I think this model, and so it goes back to that optionality piece though, which is really forces us as engineers think essentially economically. And this is the key thing. So I go on about optionality because as you said, sometimes it's like, well, is now the time to pay down that tech debt? Is now the time to, go and tidy up those old feature flags? Or is now the time to like ship this feature? And sometimes it is time to go and tidy it up, right? I'm not saying like, I think that maturity to go, instead of having this battle with the business, where the business is like, we need a feature today. And we're like, no, we've got to refactor this stuff. And it's like actually forcing engineers to be in that mindset of where do I make this trade-off rather than just being stuck in, it's always got to be like done the right way, I think is really valuable. And actually, I think this goes back to like how, engineers of the future with all this AI stuff, you might be able to get dev in to go off and do all this stuff. But ultimately at some point, this stuff still costs, right? Those agents are still going to cost money. You still are going to have to make a trade-off. Like, do I run 10 agents up to this point? I want them to then scale back or then try a different approach. Like you're going to have like someone is still pressing the button. Someone is still setting this in motion, right? That's kind of that creativity point. Even if it's agents upon agents, someone at some point is making a judgment call to go, I'm going to press this button and set it off. And I'm going to point it in this direction rather than that direction. There is still going to be somewhere a human making these economic trade-offs about what to build or what not to build or how to maintain it or how not to maintain. I think that's what we've always done as engineers. Now it's just going to like the abstraction is going to be so high that it's going to really force us to confront the fact that it's actually a lot of what we do is like an economic trade-off. And that's what we're always doing.
Alex, I think it's interesting too, because like AI, the LLMs right now, they still rate limit you. I know of multiple projects where they're getting rate limited, and so they have to have like 3 LLMs, and they basically created a connection pool, and they do some, round robin stuff, which means you have to consider the cost of a question, which we haven't thought of for a long, long time, right? Like now all of a sudden this is a thing. And I don't know when that's going to go away because, economies of scale usually gets cheaper and eventually we won't have to care. But right now you do. And so you have to architect a solution in a bit of a dark room because you don't know which feature in your app that's using this agentic workflow versus that one's going to get more usage potentially, depending on if you have the analytics and you say, oh, well, this feature seems to be the most popular, then, what's the cost of enhancing that feature and making it more capable?
Well, there's also the question that different models are better at different things. So certain things the agent needs to do can use this model, which is much cheaper. Certain things the agent needs to do needs to use GPT-5 or whatever is in the future, and that's the most expensive thing. But they actually need that. So there's going to be
There's-
that type of decision making.
Exactly. There's loads of, I think it comes back to the engineering thinking side of it. And this is where, what it means to be human. Like of course, you're going to use AI tools in potentially even to support you doing this stuff, but there's still like this idea of decision making, of making design decisions, of choosing which trade-off, where to draw the boundaries, how to architect this stuff. Like there's going to be more in that work. And so I think this is as I said, if you're in that mindset of just like code grunt, I just like, give me the thing, give me the ticket, I'm going to write it, like you're in danger. But if you're doing like high level, which I think as you go further on in your career, you do, if you're making those high level trade-off, architecture design, when to run this versus not to, how do we make this architecture, scalable, but like, we want to maybe make it easy to begin with. Who are the humans I'm dealing with? Am I a part of a big organization? Am I working with like someone who wants to start up their own app? How much am I having to explain to them? There's going to be loads of human work to do, basically, as part of that. Even if though lots and lots of stuff's going to be abstract, I think there's actually going to be more work to do than ever before. And it goes back to then, well, where do junior engineers fit in? Like, I don't think if you're a junior engineer, I'd be recommending like learning fast API syntax or how to, create like what's the express. Don't do that. Absolutely. But like, reading like things like design patterns, beginning to look at more things like systems thinking, working on your like human skills. How do you communicate with an AI, whether it's with other people? All these things, which are going to have always been valuable in your tech career, I think, to some extent, especially as you get more senior. Like it's like before, it's like you have to do your time doing all this stuff, like learning how to write the button component, right? Before you can write the feature, before you can own an entire app, before you can lead a team. Like there was this kind of progress of like, and like now that's just going to be really collapsed and condensed. And I think you, as a junior, you need to like be getting to the kind of the skills that tend to differentiate those who go on and kind of grow quickly, which is, I think a lot of it is the like, being able to think, understand the business context, be able to communicate between different people. Those things are going to become more valuable, I believe. I think it's like, I've actually said like the kind of the skills of like a tech lead, I think are going to be where you're right in the middle of understanding like product and the business requirements, and then also understanding the tech and the limitations and, who you've got in your team and like being that translation layer. Like, I think that's going to be like, those skills are going to be even more valuable in the future.
Given that you worked in this world where you actually implemented a sort of profit sharing for tech people based on the product that they worked on, I'm curious, what were the human outcomes of that? Did people start holding each other more accountable for not getting the job done or for doing the job poorly? And how did that go culturally inside of the company? Like, because I think about that, you watch any of the documentaries about like Michael Jordan on the Bulls, and he like rode the guys on his team really hard at practice. And was like, I'm here to win a championship, and I'm going to tell you everything you're doing wrong so that you get better and we can win together. When I see people do that inside companies, there's all times a lot of friction. People don't like that. Don't tell me how to do my job. It's people. That guy is like my comfort level. It's making it very uncomfortable. But the people who are trying to just get everyone else to perform at a super high level can sometimes be spit back out of the machine. So I'm just curious, like how that worked out in that company.
So I think it's fair to say, like, I left probably about like 6 months into the experiment, maybe a bit less. Like, I've got to hold my hand and say, like, I don't know how this pans out in the long term. I did catch up with the founder like very recently, and like from his perspective, things are going awesome. Like, teams are really smashing it. They're like going above and beyond. Like when I left, there were like 4 different products. They now have 10. So like, they added 10, so they have like 14. So like these teams are like really performing at a high level, and also they're getting on sales calls. They're figuring out like who do I need to get in front of to pitch this thing I'm building. It's like it's almost creating like a series of mini startups within it now. There was concern or like
well, that's interesting. So the engineers are more willing to be on sales calls because it's going to help them sell the product more, and they're going to make more money. That's brilliant.
Yeah. Well, exactly, 100%. And I think how valuable is it to be on a sales call and someone, imagine you're an engineer and you're a team of 1 or 2 engineers building this thing, and someone goes, oh yeah, well, that sucks. Like that, it's like, oh, like this isn't now filtered through multiple layers of like the salesperson talks to the product manager who then writes you're there and
feedback
you feel
from
it.
Customer to engineer. Yeah.
And all like software, the value of software and like the most value is created with these shortened feedback loops, right? Like this is kind of like Agile is about, like TDD, all these things are like, it's about collapsing the feedback loop. Like how do you know when you're failing faster? Because you're going to fail. So it's about how do you fail as fast as quickly so you can as fast as possible, so you can get to the point where it's like, oh, I'm actually succeeding now. And so I think again,
it's so true. Like when you see companies get bigger and bigger and engineering gets further and further away from the customer, like useful innovations slow down in a big way.
Exactly. And so, and going right back to like, this is why, look, we'll see what happens, but I'll still back my thing of Salesforce will die, because you think about now how quickly you can translate some of these ideas from having that conversation into something that works, into, the pace of change we're seeing it is so rapid. And the idea that something like Salesforce, which even just a big company full stop is going to really struggle, but like one of the most almost like oppositional to innovation, to going, how do we do things better? Because as we said, like that is essentially how they generate their value, is by going, we don't want to make things better. We want to make people trapped in this ecosystem and you have to use our engineers, and you're stuck in here basically. And we don't have to optimize for how good the product is or our cost, because you're in here and it has a certain cache, it has a certain status, and we're just embedded, and you can't. But I think lots of big companies are going to really struggle with this. But I do think of all of them, like Salesforce is one of the going to be like really exposed.
They're trying to transition to AI and agents and all this other stuff. So we'll see if they can make the transition. Time will tell. They know their current business is not going to be what it is in the future. Companies like 80/90 are doing that 80% of the functionality for 90% less money. So
exactly.
If that succeeds, like that's going to kill a lot of these big companies. All right. Well, I know we don't have too much time left.
We brought it full circle.
I know we don't have too much time. You're a great guest, by the way.
Oh, thank you. Well. Appreciate that.
I don't know if you do a lot of podcasts, but I find British people are able to just shoot the shit a lot better. Like just your random British person is going to be really good at shooting the shit about anything, which is pretty awesome.
Maybe. Yeah. I think the Oxford thing definitely helped. Trains you to shoot a lot of shit.
That's true. So you transition out of being a CTO. Now you're a fractional CTO. You work with a bunch of startups. So tell me about being a fractional CTO. What's like the minimum amount of time that you need to be able to spend with a company every week to be able to actually have an impact? Like how much can you actually do?
So it's a really good question. Right now I'm working with one main client, and I'm kind of in the final conversations with a few others. And so this question of like, well, how does this work time-wise is very pressing. I think one of the key things is, and this isn't original, I've nicked this from elsewhere, but I find it really helpful, which is most people define fractional by time. So full-time CTO is 5 days a week. Fractional CTO works 2 days a week, right? And there's some utility in that. But the way I prefer to think about it is going, actually, a full-time CTO does these 8 things, right? So let's say technical vision and direction, team management, hiring, infrastructure, regulation, compliance, working with the business, understanding the business, translating that into technical roadmap, maybe some hands-on coding if you're in an early stage company. So I won't list, I can't remember all 8 of them off the top of my head, but let's say there's 8. And so the way I define it is, well, the reason you're talking to me is because whatever reason, there can be a few different ones. You either can't afford or don't want to pay for a full-time CTO. And so therefore pick which 2 of these do you need, which 3 of these do you need? And that's what I'll focus on, right? And then for me, it's like, well, okay, I do have limited time, and I have limited capacity. So I will kind of pick and structure my engagements based on that. But yeah, so there's a few different, with this client, it was kind of my first client, and I've actually started off kind of experimentally, which, why not sort of straight away on the first one. And so the first thing I learned is, moving into fractional, moving into kind of the freelance world is completely different ball game, right? I don't know if either of you do any kind of consulting, ever moved in that space, but I remember the first week, like sending out all these emails, so buzzy, like, and then just like crickets. And like some people did eventually get back to me, but obviously I'm used to being, like CTO or being, in a team where people are like, they're going to respond to me immediately or at least within a few hours, right? And something like, I'm not in anything anymore. Like I'm knocking on the door.
You're the outsider.
They have other stuff to do. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And so it was definitely a learning curve. I've been doing this about 6 months or so. So I'm still figuring a lot of stuff out. But what I've learned is, I think this core idea of, well, which of these things do you want me to focus on? So with this current client, it's a 0 to 1 health tech startup doing wearables for people who suffer from rheumatoid arthritis. So there is a strong build component here, right? And I was like, look, I've done a bit of like, React Native. I'm definitely not the best mobile developer in the world. And also you can't afford hire me full time, right? Like that's kind of why we're having this conversation. And so
are they kind of doing this what stage?
Almost like pre-seed. So they've come out of an accelerator, got an initial tranche of funding to build essentially like an MVP. And then they're off the back of that going to aim to raise, I guess, like a proper pre-seed round. So that's so it's, limited budget. And so what I'm doing with them is basically I'm like working with a junior engineer who's there basically doing the building day in, day out. And I'm providing essentially like the kind of technical oversight, guidance, high level strategy with the founders, but also being able to do a bit of like essentially management and coaching with the junior to make sure, we don't go too far off the rails, and doing a bit of prioritization and things like that. And so this kind of inspired in some way that post that went viral on LinkedIn, because I do think, there is essentially an untapped market here, or like an opportunity where you're going to have loads of junior engineers who can't get a job. You're going to have loads of, I call it almost like engineering teachers, right? Like middle managers, engineering managers who are all getting cut at the moment as well in the industry. Again, with this focus on, we'll just have senior engineers who manage themselves and do all the stuff with AI. And then I think you also have this other trend of you're going to have more software being created, more software needs to start being cultivated, and people working with it. Like maybe it's doing something today, it's generating money, and they built it using an AI tool. But now it needs to scale, it needs to do all this stuff. And that non-technical fan has no idea what Kubernetes is. It doesn't, they don't know how to do any of this. And AI will only get them so far. And so I think there is this kind of these few different factors that are coming together. And I think it's like right on the cusp, but we're going to see actually more demand for more software engineers than we currently have. And so I think there's an interesting model here where I've set up a community to start looking at this and start bringing people together who are kind of interested in it. It's called Engineering Futures. I can share the link if people are interested in getting involved. But the idea is to kind of bring people together because I think there's something there basically. All that say with the startup, so the startup I'm working with, it's almost like in mini, right? Like I'm doing the fractional, I'm working with that software engineer, that junior engineer. But I think, you could have other fractional like engineering managers working with juniors who are AI native, and both sides figuring out and learning and upskilling how to use AI, how to use it effectively to solve these business problems. And, I think this is the experiment. I treat everything as an experiment because honestly, a lot of the time, I definitely don't know what the future is going to look like. And I have no idea what success.
I think it's the right way to do it.
Success.
Everything has to be an experiment, and see what works and what doesn't.
Alex, this was great. Thank you very much.
No problem. Thank you. Yeah. Nice to meet you too.
Thanks, Steve. We'll wrap it up.
All right. I'll see you later.
Bye. So when you're working at this stage, are you mostly paid in stock because the company hasn't raised a huge amount of money, or how does the compensation part work out?
Yeah. So I am paid. I need to pay the mortgage. I think there is a group of fractional CTOs who I think do work more. It's almost like angel investing with their time, where they'll just work for equity for companies. But I do make sure that equity is part of any conversation I'm having, because while I need to, pay the mortgage and keep a roof over my head, I'm not working, especially with early stage stuff, for like a quick buck. Like I'm working with them because I believe in what they're doing and that they're going to go on and do something important. And so, equity is part of the package.
Cool. So how many companies do you think you'll end up? What's your goal? Is your goal to be full time? So you're going to do 2 days a week at 2 or 3 different companies, or what?
So that's the thing for me is, again, getting into fractional was almost working backwards, because I was like, I don't want to work full time. That's why I left Intropic. Like I loved Intropic. It's an awesome company. It's doing great stuff. But I realized like we've got a young daughter. We're actually planning to like home educate. And so I was like, well, if I'm serious about that and if I want to be involved in that, then I want more flexibility. I don't want to be working full time. And then kind of fractional was like taking off. And fractional sounds sexier than part time, right? So, and also it makes sense economically. I also was like, I want to work with early stage startups. So I'd gone on that 10-year journey, and like now I'm like at the point where I can work once more with these like really early stage exciting companies, and I have like the technical backing to be able to I'm not just working on the content side anymore. Although, I'm writing a lot of stuff on LinkedIn, so that's kind of an irony there. But, that I am coming to it with a technical backing now. And, and fractional actually makes sense economically for them, because it's not even that sometimes they can't afford it. It's also like a lot of these companies don't need full-time CTOs anymore, because like they need someone that they can bounce ideas with. They need someone who can like provide that engineering thinking to make sure they're not necessarily like going off in a completely the wrong direction. But they can do more and more themselves, and or with a junior engineer, like the leverage they have is now a lot higher as well. So I think it's it's an exciting time. I'm obviously within a small bubble, in a small and it's easy for me to project my experience out and think, but I do, the counter to that is I can see on the front lines of this stuff, right? I am right in the thick of like the London startup scene. I see the conversations people are having, the way people are thinking about stuff. And so I do think there is, I know it feels a lot of doom and gloom at the moment. There's a lot of fear around kind of AI and what it means for engineering. But I think actually the future is pretty bright, and there's actually going to be a lot more, even more exciting stuff to do. So,
do you think you'll just stay at each company for a certain amount of time till they get to a point where they need someone full time, and then you'll bounce to the next one, or like, and how do you find these companies in such an early stage? Are you involved in an incubator? Like, how do you find these people who need someone like you?
Yeah, so that was like the number one question when I moved into this, where I was like, how do I find people? And the idea of like kind of doing like cold LinkedIn outreach just like made my stomach turn. So I was like, I just focused on networking. So yeah, I am connected with a couple of incubators, having conversations with them, having conversations with people, going through those, offering like kind of sometimes pro bono, like office hours. So like offering advice. And then obviously if they make it to the other side and they get funding, then, that was my current client. That's where that came from. It was like, Alex is like top of mind. We've had lots of conversations with him. We built that trust. So I've really been focused on the in-person stuff, and with very early stage, that's kind of easier because you've got things like incubators. There's lots of like founder events and meetups and stuff like that. I've also been kind of exploring like later stage companies as well, and that's a bit harder because the founders and people are busy, right? Yeah. And so that is kind of an ongoing exploration. But I think there it's kind of more actually almost like the customers, more like VCs. So it might not be necessarily the founders themselves, but it might be their investors or people who are working with them who, might be able to just, you're having X problem, like Alex can help with that. But I think that's probably more on the consultation side. So I think, there's kind of a few, like, I think fractional, I think people who I respect who talk about this, I think kind of identify, and probably rightly, that fractional for a lot of people is a transitional role. It's like, I either want a full-time role, so I'll do some fractional ones and like hope that one of them gets a big round of funding and hires me full-time, and then I'll do that. And for other people, it's like I just want to like play the field a bit and like do a bunch of stuff, but then maybe I niche down. So I talked about like those like 8 different things. Maybe you find out like you're really good at setting up infra for startups or like optimizing infra costs, and so you start just going, I'm going to just focus on that, right? Like forget all the other bump. I'm just going to like get really, really good at this one specific thing. And that's how I
there are definitely people who like, I'm going to help you reduce your AWS bill. And that's like that's their whole job.
That's their shtick. And it's pretty, and it's a really compelling, I mean, talk about, kind of the economics. Like a lot of them will pitch it as like, if I don't save you essentially my fee, in your AWS bills, you don't have to pay me. And so it's like a really clear.
Well, I'll save you example. 3 times my fee, or something like that. Yeah,
exactly. I mean, the number of conversations I have where, with like DevOps engineers who are like, I've saved this company like 100K this year and I can't get a 10K increase, right? Like, and so I think, again, going back to that point about like senior engineers beginning to, that's like a really easy use case and like really obvious. But I think you will see engineers going, hold on, I'm like doing all this, I'm generating all this money for you, and I'm not seeing anything, and you're forcing me back to the office 5 days a week, and, you're firing loads of people who I like working with. And like, I think engineers will start going, even the senior engineers will start going, is this what I want? Like, can I, and especially when I can just like build all this stuff, as you said, I can just have 5 Devons running and doing all this stuff, and I can just chill and like.
Well, it's not chilling, but I'm still watching it. There's a lot of work to do and correcting them.
You're right,
but
it's
a different skill set.
It's a different skill set, exactly, and like, but you're doing way more in that hour. That
definitely,
you're, like there's no
accomplish a lot.
You could accomplish what you used to do in a full day in probably a few hours, right? And so then, like, if you work more than that, you're just generating way more value. You're now generating, but for that company, right? Definitely. And that's fine if they recognize that. And going back to that sort of commission or like P&L stuff, like if they recognize that and you get a slice of that, awesome. Yeah, you're happy to do it. But if you don't, begging for like a 10% increase or something like that, you're like, what the hell?
I'm 10x more productive. I can't even get a 10% raise. Yeah.
So we're at the early. We'll see how this stuff shakes out, but I do think it's a lot of changes coming.
Yeah, there's a lot of, I don't know how you would implement that kind of profit sharing model at a company that doesn't make a profit yet, or, even if you're a company that makes a profit, how do you get engineers to work on products that aren't doing sales yet, right? You got to get people bootstrapping in, and if there's no P&L yet, So I
Yeah.
know there's a lot of like nuances to this and needs to be
100%.
sorted out, but I really like that idea.
Yeah.
I
There's-
do need to wrap it up because I got to
Sure,
get on
sure.
another call too. So let
Yeah,
me
no
do the
worries.
close out here. All right, Alex, thanks for joining. This was a very engaging discussion. I really like the way that you organize your thoughts, the way you share your spicy hot takes, not just here, but also on LinkedIn. And maybe that comes from being at Oxford and having to share spicy debates and potentially taking the side you don't want to take, but supporting it anyway, because that's the assignment. So I really like the way that you do that. Thanks for joining us today.
Absolute pleasure. Thanks so much, Chad. I'm really looking forward to seeing how things develop. I think it's an interesting time. Thanks so much for having me. Really appreciate it.
It's never boring. All right. Thanks everybody for listening, and we'll see you on the next episode.